You're welcome to English 211, Forms of Literature 1, Prose Fiction. Today we will examine Studies Session 5 with the title Elements of Prose Fiction. Introduction. As stated by Janet Evanovich, effective writing requires an understanding of the fundamental elements of storytelling, such as point of view, dialogue, and setting. The debate continues as to the number and composition of the fundamental elements of fiction. In this study session, we will examine some of the fundamental elements of fiction, bringing out their nature, tenets, functions, and types. When you have studied this session, you should be able to highlight the elements of prose fiction, discuss the features, types, and functions of the major elements of fiction, identify the elements employed in any prose text, critique the elements employed in any prose text, differentiate between story and plot, between subject matter and theme. You should also be able to discuss the forms, tenets, and functions of setting, atmosphere, point of view, and techniques as elements of fiction. And finally, you should also be able to critique the employment of these elements in a given fictional text. What is a story? In everyday sense, a story is any narrative or tale recounting series of events. In modern narratology, however, the term refers more specifically to the sequence of imagined events that we reconstruct from the actual arrangement of a narrative or dramatic plot. And this modern distinction between story and plot derived from the Russian formalism and its opposed terms fabula and jusset. The story is a full sequence of events as we assume them to have occurred in their likely order, duration, and frequency, while the plot is a particular selection and reordering of this. Thus, the story is an abstractly conceived raw material of events which we'll reconstruct from the finished arrangement of the plot, that is, it includes events preceding and otherwise omitted from the perceived action, and its sequence will differ from that of the plot if the action begins in medias res or otherwise involves an anachrony. What is the subject matter? A subject matter is a major highlight of a work of art. In recognizing it, one must identify the topic stages in the development of the plot. In arriving at the subject matter of The Mayor of Casterbridge, for instance, one must consider the various stages which attract important topics of discussion in Henchard's life. This will include the sale of his wife, his wandering about looking for job, the rise to the position of mayor, reunification with his wife, his contact with Farfrae to manage Henchard's business, secret love affairs with Lucetta, revelation of how he sold his wife and eventual loss of exalted position as mayor, his bankruptcy, and eventual death. The plot in this novel is one that focuses on effects of actions on character development. Thus, the discussion of the character of Henchard will help in arriving at the subject matter. The subject matter will then come in form of a summary of these crucial topic stages. Having understood what subject matter is all about, what is a theme? A theme is sometimes used interchangeably with motive, but the term is more usually applied to an abstract claim or doctrine, whether implicit or asserted, that an imaginative work is designed to incorporate and made persuasive to the reader. For instance, Richard Wright states explicitly the theme of racism and the will of the blacks to survive a divided society in the book Black Boy. Some critics claim that all non-trivial works of literature, including lyric poems, involving an implicit conceptual theme, which is embodied and dramatized in the involving meanings and imagery. What is a plot? This is the pattern of events and situations in a narrative or dramatic work, as selected and arranged both to emphasize relationships, usually of cause and effect, between incidents, and to elicit a particular kind of interest in the reader or audience, such as surprise or suspense. Plots and character are interdependent critical concepts. As Henry James has said, what is character but the determination of incident? What is incident but the illustration of character? There are a great variety of plot forms. For example, some plots are designed to achieve tragic effects and others to achieve the effects of comedy, romance, or satire. The chief character in a work upon whom our interest centers is called the protagonist, and if he is pitted against an important opponent, that character is called an antagonist. Henchard is the protagonist, while Farfrae is the antagonist in Hardy's novel The Mayor of Casterbridge, and the relation between them is one of conflict. In addition to conflict between individuals, there may be conflict of a protagonist against fate, or perhaps the circumstances that stand between him and a goal he has set for himself. And in some work, the conflict is between opposite desires or values in a character's own mind. If a character sets up a scheme which depends for its success on the ignorance or gullibility of the person or persons against whom it is directed, it is called an intrigue. As a plot progresses, it arouses expectations in the audience or reader about the future course of events and how characters will respond to events. An anxious uncertainty about what is going to happen, especially to those characters whose qualities are such that we have established a bond of sympathy with them, is known as suspense. If what in fact happens violates our expectations, it is called surprise. The interplay of suspense and surprise is a prime source of the vitality of any traditional plot. A plot also has the unity of action if it is perceived by the reader as a single, complete, and ordered structure of actions directed toward the intended effect, in which none of the component parts or incidents is unnecessary. That is, all the parts are so closely connected that the transposition or withdrawal of any one of them will disjoint and dislocate the whole. What are the types of plots that we have? There are two main types of plots, the organic and the episodic. An organic plot is one that shows close relationship between the episodes. In addition, these episodes maintain good cause and effect relationship. It is one in which the actions are well united in a way that they cannot be separated. It has a beginning, middle, and end, which are so well linked that they become inseparable. Any attempt to remove any part will disorganize the flow of events. Besides, cause and effect of events are seen in the work. The parts of this kind of plot function like an organism whose parts are inseparable. Away from organic plots, let us now take a look at what an episodic plot is. An episodic plot is one in which there are two or more series of incidents. The episodes here succeed each other without any logical arrangement and without complication or close relationship. The parts of the story are separable as there is no unity of events. Each event stands on its own without necessarily affecting the flow of events in other parts of the story. The metrical romance and the picaresque novels are said to have episodic structure. This is because the events that occur in them have little causal relationship. Such plots have little or no central plot. What is a subplot? Subplots can be referred to as secondary plots or subordinate plots or minor plots which runs through a piece of fiction. Usually, it has direct relationship to the main plot and contributes to its interest and struggle. Some writers create 3 or 4 subplots. This situation arises when too many characters are introduced into the narration. Their relationship to the main character normally shades off into many subordinate subplots. When this happens, such plots become episodic in nature. Story and plots, a contrast. Indeed, the first thing to consider in reading fiction is plots. Plot, in a sense, is the way events are selected and arranged in a narrative work to present them most effectively to the reader. Comparing plot with story can clarify that. Story is a straightforward account of everything that happens in the order that it happens. Story provides the material with which a plot is constructed. As a story is converted to a plot, some things are left out. That is, ones that are not essential for the effect and emphasis desired. Things are sometimes rearranged, and causal connections between key events are brought out. The interest in plot is not just in what happens, but why it happens and the implications or results of what happens. Aristotle, in one of the earliest works on imaginative writing, said, "A plot must have a beginning, a middle, and an end." Those terms have been used as a basis for the way readers talk about plot ever since. Beginning, middle, and end, other terminologies such as suspense and conflict, grew out of analysis of drama which focus on action and suspense. These terms, transferred successfully to the novel, also centered on action and to the early short story. However, they are less applicable to some modern fiction, especially short stories, which focus often on inner struggles without much physical action or external conflicts. You should also know that, in summary, story is a raw material while plot is the refiner. Parts of plot. Beginning. A plot usually starts at a point that relates directly and significantly to the series of events being recorded. Dagoberto Gilb's Love in LA starts with Jake in his car caught in a traffic jam. Earlier events in his day are not included: what time he got up, whether he had breakfast, where he is going. These details may be important in Jake's larger life, but because they are not relevant to his encounter with Mariana, they do not concern readers. For fiction writers, decisions about what to leave out are as important as what to include. Equally important is the arrangement of the events that follow the opening. Love in LA is told in chronological order, the order in which the events occur, but that may not always be the case for works of fiction. Sometimes, the first events in the related sequence, though necessary to the story, are not the best place to start. The most interesting or exciting or important events occur later. Readers become more quickly and deeply involved when the plot starts at an engaging point well into the story and fills in the background events later as needed. In fact, for thousands of years, this has been a common way for storytellers to proceed. The Latin phrase "in medias res," meaning into the middle of things, is used to describe it. The background events are usually filled in through a flashback or through exposition. Love in Ellie could have begun in the middle, with Jake's car bumping Mariana's, and then gone back to explain what Jake was daydreaming about instead of paying attention to his driving. And if Gilb had wanted to emphasize the accident instead of Jake's character, that probably would have been a better way to start. The middle. Of course, the story must have a middle. Something has to come between the beginning and the end. But what goes into the middle? Can't a writer just lay out what happens the way it happens? Of course, but often that is not the best way to hold a reader's interest. Remember, plot involves the arrangement of the action, whereby the story builds on the beginning and leads us to the ending that requires particular techniques for increasing intensity and holding the reader's interest. Identifying a conflict is a helpful way to get into a story when you want to look at the story's complexity more closely and discuss why the conflict is one worth thinking about. To hold readers' interest, the middle of a plot often creates some degree of suspense, some uncertainty, and concern about how things will turn out, who did what the effect on the characters or events will be, or when disaster will fall or rescue will occur. The word suspense might be too strong for Love in Ellie, but we are curious at least to find out if Jake can get away with all that he's trying to do. It is important to note that the beginning and middle of a story often contain foreshadowings, anticipations of things that will happen later. For example, when the mother in Julia Alvarez's Daughter of Invention says, "When I make $1 million, I'll buy you your very own typewriter," it foreshadows the ending where her father gives her a brand new electric typewriter, even better than the one I'd been begging to get like my mother's. Repetitions are also often included to draw our attention to especially important aspects of the story. The middle of a plot holds its reader's attention by building, becoming more complex and more intense until it reaches a crisis of some sort, the climax, the thing the suspense builds toward. This terminology grew out of action-based plots where the most intense moment is the peak of the physical conflict. The climax of a scientific action movie might come when just before the gelatin-coated cyborg sends an earth-freezing probe into the center of the planet, the Kung Fu master heroine shoots a laser into the monster's ultra-sensitive fifth eye and saves the world. In a story focusing on inner conflict, by contrast, the climax might be a moment of inner realization, the point at which the main character realizes that gambling is destroying his family and decides to go into rehab, which turns his life around. Epiphany describes a moment when a character experiences a sudden moment of illumination or revelation, especially as a result of perceiving a commonplace object in a new way or through a new context. Esperanza in Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street might be said to have experienced an epiphany when a nun points to her third-floor apartment and says, "You live there?" Suddenly, she realizes how other people regard her house. what the house says about her and her family, how much she needs to have a real house to improve her sense of self-worth and identity. Picking out a climax is not the same as understanding a work of fiction, nor is it a definite feature all readers identify in the same way. There can be differences of opinion about what a story's climax is, or even about whether a given story has one. If Love in LA has a climax, it might well come in the next to last paragraph when Jake seems not only to have avoided responsibility for the accident, but also to have won Mariana's interest in him. Her hand felt so warm and soft. He felt like he'd been kissed. A literary work cannot and should not include everything that happens during the series of events it is relating. Reading or hearing everything would get pretty boring. But what things are omitted? Whatever is not significant to the action typically is left out. For example, if characters are ordinary people, they need to eat or get some sleep. But except where these activities are crucial to the overall story, they are omitted. Since lots of unimportant things are left out, you usually can assume that anything that is included is significant. You can be confident that almost everything in the work is there for a reason, every detail, maybe even every word. Excellent authors are very careful and deliberate in selecting what to include, presenting only those things that contribute something to the overall effect of the story. Because an author cannot include everything, stories inevitably leave gaps, places where things are omitted or not filled in. As active readers, we need to use our imaginations to fill any significant gaps, supplying information or explanations the story does not spell out. Authors often create gaps intentionally as a way of getting readers actively involved. Mystery and detective stories always create gaps as part of the structure. Part of the enjoyment of reading stories is reaching with our imaginations for what is omitted, seeking to supply missing details or connecting links, anticipating what may be ahead, and revising our earlier anticipations in light of what we find out later. In a milder way, as we read about the mother's ideas in Daughter of Invention, we begin anticipating that this emphasis on inventions is leading to something. We begin wondering what, maybe trying to guess. Does she manage to come up with a crazily sane possibility that makes the family rich? In the end, we'll find that we were right. There was a last important invention, but inventing a speech was nothing that we could have predicted. Gaps also can indicate what is meaningful but not important, what the story recognizes as potentially meaningful but is not interested in. If a story about the difficulties a pair of lovers encounter in their relationship ends before the marriage takes place, the gap indicates that their married life is not significant to the story. Its interest is in their solving the difficulties they encounter in getting together. Gaps, on the other hand, can be used to signal what is very important, often putting even more emphasis on a detail or bit of information by having the reader supply it, even suggesting, perhaps, that the very process of working to fill the gap is crucial to the effect. The Red Convertible, for example, says a lot about the Vietnam War by saying very little about it. At the heart of that pattern of action usually is some kind of conflict, some struggle or confrontation between opposing characters or a character and opposing forces. At least one side of the struggle involves the main character. Physical conflict. One basic kind of conflict occurs as a physical struggle or confrontation between a character, or group of characters and another character or group of characters. The showdown between a sheriff's pose and a gang of outlaws in an old western, for example, or a fist fight between two rivals at a high school room. Physical conflict can also involve humans struggling against nature. A group of sailors, perhaps led by a courageous captain, attempting to survive a fierce storm. Love in L.A. has no physical conflict, but it is easy to imagine how the events could have turned into a road rage story with physical conflict at its center. Social conflict. A further type of conflict involves differences regarding personal and societal relationships or values. This is a common motive in modern fictions. Examples could include a teenager challenging his or her parents, the differing gender outlooks a man and a woman might bring to the same situation, or an activist confronting a social injustice. Internal or psychological conflict. Another variety of conflict deals with struggle within a character as she or he wrestles with competing moral claims or a difficult decision. This has always been a central issue for literature. Numerous stories show characters engaged in such inner struggles. Inner conflict often appears at crucial moments in a person's life, that is, when they face the moment of death, like the grandmother does in Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. An identity crisis, when a crucial event forces a person to a new or deeper sense of self-knowledge or self-awareness, often a moment of maturation, like Myops in Alice Walker's The Flowers. A belief crisis, when something causes a person to re-examine the foundation of what he or she puts faith or trust in. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown, a value crisis, when something forces a person to decide how to make a moral or ethical decision. Ending. A story must end, of course. It cannot go on forever, but it also cannot just stop. The difference between just stopping is that the effective ending gives a sense of wholeness and leaves you satisfied or satisfyingly unsatisfied as a reader or listener. One of the big differences between fiction and real life is that life carries on after reaching a big event, while the series of events in a fictional plot reaches a terminal point, the conflict around which it was shaped or resolved, and the story ends. The French term denouement is often used in discussing the ending of a story. It literally means unknotting the untying of the threads that are tangled and knotted, the solution of the mysteries, the explanation of the secrets and misunderstandings. An ending, in addition to unknotting tangles, often ties up the loose ends, leaving us with a sense of finality or momentary stay against ordinary chaos. That does not mean that everything turns out happily. Some stories have unresolved unhappy endings. But it does not mean that the questions and problems we have been involved with, if not solved or even resolved, at least are adequately accounted for. We know all that we need to know to comprehend and reflect on the story as a whole. The last paragraph of Love in L.A. has a feeling of finality. The lives of Jake and Mariana do not end, but nothing that follows is relevant to the story of their encounter under the Alvarado Street overpass. What is character? Who is a character? This is the act of creating appropriate characters, both human and non-human, to act out the events of a plot structure. A broad distinction is frequently made between alternative methods for characterizing the persons in a narrative, showing and telling. In showing, the author merely presents his characters talking and acting and leaves the reader to infer what motives and dispositions lie behind what they say and do. In telling, the author himself intervenes authoritatively in order to describe and often to evaluate the motives and dispositional qualities of his characters. For example, in the fine opening chapter of Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen shows us Mr. and Mrs. Bennet as they talk to each other about the young man who has just rented Netherfield Park, then tells us about him and so confirms and extends the inferences and judgments that the reader has begun to make from what he has been shown. This whole story is an interior monologue. A story or a novel, however, can be presented partly through interior monologue or stream of consciousness and partly through another point of view. We have now come to the end of Studies Session 5. In this study session, we identified and discussed some of the elements of prose fiction: story, subject matter, theme, plot, character, and characterization. We convincingly argue that effective writing requires an understanding of the fundamental elements of storytelling. We also concluded that debate continues as to the number and composition of the fundamental elements of fiction. We have been able to examine some of the fundamental elements of fiction, bringing out their nature, tenets, functions, and types. This study session has been a continuation of our discussion on elements of prose fiction. We examined other major elements of fiction, including diction, setting, atmosphere, and point of view. We also endeavored to highlight the basic functions, types, and tenets of these elements. We drew apt textual illustrations